So it's better in terms of representation of American women than many academic art museums are. And I give a lot of credit to the fact that early on, we had women curators, women directors, fairly early in the museum's history. One of our current staff members, Kim Dachek, who's the curator of learning and engagement at the museum, has been doing a study showing that it's really the women curators who are collecting work by women, which is interesting. So it's better than it could be, but it still is not proportional. So we have a lot of work to do to really be truly inclusive in terms of women's representation in the collection. We are lucky enough at the University of Iowa to have some really wonderful women who've come through the School of Art and Art History, and some of them are represented in the collection. Elizabeth Catlett, we were fortunate to get a portfolio of her prints that really represent her career in the last few years, and that is a very heavily used part of our collection even now before we have a museum building. But there are other wonderful women artists who have an association with the University of Iowa, Lorraine O'Grady being one of them, who are not represented in the collection at all. And so we have a lot of work to do still to really balance the collection and make it truly inclusive. So this is so important now, I think. Because we're an academic museum, we have a story to tell to students who are just beginning their careers as artists about what is possible for them. They are looking for models, and I think one thing that we can present are the careers of women artists who have been successful and their entire trajectory as artists. So that's something that I really want to work on in the museum collection. And then of course we are serving a broader audience than just the academic audience at the University of Iowa. We have a robust public audience. So to them, we're telling a story about the history of American art. And women artists have been an important part of that story. It's not a story we can completely tell yet with the collection as it is. And then school children. I mean, we have a robust program for school children. Once the museum building is in place, we hope that we are serving 10,000 school children a year who come to visit the museum. And for those kids in particular, we want them to see that women can have careers as artists and that they can have representation in museums like ours. It's going to be so helpful in helping us really fulfill the promise of our collection plan. So we have been busy this year writing a plan for the collection, and achieving better gender balance in terms of the artists represented in the collection is an important part of that plan. So we are a museum with very specific areas of depth, and one of them is 20th century American art. We have some of the great works of art that were created in the 20th century in the United States, Jackson Pollock's mural, for instance. But we have no work in the collection by Pollock's wife, Lee Krasner, who is also his teacher. So that's a real gap that we're looking to address. And works on paper are a great way for academic museums to fill that gap, and this fund will help us do that. So we're looking for works on paper by Lee Krasner, by Elaine de Kooning, for instance, and by a whole host of other women who were deeply engaged in the abstract expressionist movement. Another artist that we're really looking to acquire is Lorraine O'Grady. This is an artist who was at the forefront of performance art in the 1960s and 70s. She was here as a student in the Writer's Workshop just at the outset of her career, and it's an egregious gap that we're hoping we can fill. So right now we're really allowing the fund to build. I acquired a ceramic piece by an artist named Simone Lee last year, a really wonderful face jug that ties to our African collection. It's a work by an important, rising star in the field of American art, and I considered this fund at that time. But I decided that it would be better to really let it build and begin using it with a major acquisition that was still sort of out of reach of what was in the fund at that time. And so, I think an artist who has a tie to the University of Iowa or who, has a tie to the strengths of our collection, would be a great way to start using the power that this fund gives us. Yeah, I mean, I was at Expo Chicago this year, and I saw some really wonderful works by both Elaine de Kooning and Lee Krasner. So those are two women not represented currently in the collection that I think I really would, they're high on my list to acquire. And then Lorraine O'Grady, so one of the pieces that Lorraine O'Grady did that I really love is she participated in a street parade in Harlem in the early 1980s. And what she did is she walked around with picture frames, and these are like ornate portrait frames like you would see around a society portrait by an artist like John Singer Sargent, or John Singleton Copley, of a very wealthy, important member of American society. And she walked around with these frames and just held them in front of these lovely, a lot of young people, very diverse crowd, and then photographed them inside the frame. And it was a really smart way of flipping the conversation about who are the important people in American society. Who are we going to look back on when we look at the late 20th century and think of as being the men and women who were making change at that time. And of course, many of these subjects were African American, and they were participating in a really important community event. And so it flips, the inside and the outside in lots of ways. Who's inside houses, who's out in the street, who is inside of American history, who's on the outside of it. So she's just a really smart artist who, again, has an affiliation with the university, and I would love to see her represented in the collection. Not sufficiently, I think this is a big story that we have that needs to be told, and I think the museum is the right entity to tell it. So I'm excited to get to tell that story. I'm very proud to be at the University of Iowa. We were really a pioneer in the field of art education. We, the first MFA that was ever offered was offered here, and it was offered to Elizabeth Catlett, who was an African-American woman. And, we remain true to that history. We really have been, on the cutting edge of, bringing smart, innovative women in and, launching them into brilliant careers from the University of Iowa. So I would like to see every single one of those women represented in the collection so that we can really tell a more complete story of American art and the role that the University of Iowa has played in shaping it.